Hi, everybody. Again, my name is Jana Kirshner, and our webinar tonight is called Using C3 in Active Classroom to Develop Students' Inquiry Skills. So I'm hoping that you're familiar with Active Classroom. This is a social studies school service webinar that's sort of highlighting the product. But if it is new to you, we can kind of talk to you about who to talk to get a free trial with that, because everything I'm going to share with you, I'll highlight some of the series, but know that they will work with any kind of text, and the strategies will work with any kind of primary, secondary sources, because we're really going to focus on the C3 framework and how we can use it to develop students' inquiry skills. So let me tell you a little bit about me and kind of what our plan is for our short time together tonight. My background is I am a high school social studies and English teacher, had one of those double majors and taught both, kind of whatever they needed to be taught in any given year. Went from high school to working with a co-op. I'm from Kentucky, so Kentucky has education co-ops, and I worked with Teaching American History grants, which were federal grants for professional development for history teachers. Ended up doing that for 10 years, working with content and pedagogy for social studies teachers, and just loved it. I'm a self-proclaimed history geek, so that was a dream job for me. Taught for a while at Western Kentucky University and taught social studies methods. That's here in Bowling Green, Kentucky. Classroom management, just kind of whatever they needed taught, and then just have retired in the last couple of years as an instructional supervisor for a school district. So I really wanted to get back in there in the K-12 world and work with teacher coaching and planning and content standards, curriculum, all of that kind of work. Retired after 27 years, and I'm doing part-time consulting work in social studies. So I'm doing all social studies again, which I love, and just have kind of fallen in love with social studies school service and their products, and Active Classroom is one of the ones we're going to highlight tonight as we talk about inquiry. So doing a lot of work with social studies and training teachers across Kentucky and in different states across the US. So really love it. I'm glad you're here. I put my email information and my website at the bottom of the slide and at the end. So if you want anything, and this is PowerPoint, if there's some things that you could use that would be helpful to you in your work, just feel free to email me. And I know Jessica's recording this, but every once in a while I know you just want a slide or you want to see something again. So feel free to email me at the end or anytime if you would like this PowerPoint. So also, we're going to use the chat feature tonight. So there is a slide coming up. I'll kind of give you a heads up on this, that I need your input to kind of help us get started thinking about what inquiry is and what inquiry looks like in our classrooms. So feel free at any time to use that chat feature, and Jessica is going to help monitor that, so I'll make sure I catch it as I'm talking. Also, if you have ideas you want to share, questions you want to ask while we're talking, please feel free to do that, and we'll make sure we kind of talk about that as we go. So kind of tentatively, here's our plan. Through here for our webinar, we're going to talk about what is inquiry, give us a framework that's similar for what we mean when we say inquiry in social studies, using the C3 framework to develop inquiry, and then ways to design inquiry-based units or lessons. So some of you may plan on the unit level, some of you may plan on a day-to-day kind of lesson way of thinking, and how you can use some of those active classroom series and resources to be able to help you with that. Again, if you're not familiar with Active Classroom, know that you can substitute any of your type of text that you use in any of these strategies. So then I wanted to kind of end with showing you how to find things in the product, because this does focus on a product a little bit, and then any kind of questions and answers that you have or comments that you have at the end of the webinar. So that's our tentative plan. So here's where I need you to use the chat feature to get us started. So if we were to kind of zap into an inquiry-based social studies classroom, I want you to think about whether that's, I think both of y'all are middle school, high school, either one. What might we see students doing or saying in that classroom? So I'm going to be quiet for a minute and let you kind of give me some feedback, and we'll use that to get us started. Okay, I'm going to feel free to type comments in here. I'm gonna continue talking. Thank you. It might be they are collaborating. I know that wait time is really hard. Might be they're collaborating. They're analyzing primary sources, secondary sources. They are building arguments. I like how you put all that in one comment. Students could be asking questions and analyzing sources and collaborating. Thank you for your feedback. They might be talking to each other, so a lot of student talk as opposed to teacher talk. Sometimes it's challenging, and I think as we're doing our webinar tonight, think about what are some of those challenges and how can some of the active classroom resources be used to help with those challenges. So thank you for your feedback on that. Keep adding to the chat feature if you have other ideas. So let's continue and kind of talk about the framework. And I know some of you are probably familiar with this, but the framework for inquiry in social studies right now across the country is the College Career and Civic Life Framework. And it was published in 2013. And it's based on the inquiry arc. So I want to make sure we ground everything we talk about next in that. And different states are at different places on adopting state standards to match that C3 framework. But that inquiry arc is based on 4 dimensions. And it is dimension 1, having students develop questions and planning inquiries. Dimension 2, applying disciplinary tools and concepts. So through the lens of civics, economics, geography, and history, they look for answers to those questions and those inquiries. And dimension 3 then is gathering and evaluating sources, developing claims and using evidence. And then dimension 4 is we want them to be able to communicate those conclusions. And then I always kind of say our end game of social studies K-12 is to produce these responsible citizens who can have a voice and take informed action and solve problems, whether that's community, state, whatever that is. So that's kind of our goal as they graduate through our programs. So we want to make sure everything we think about as we talk about designing inquiry lessons or units is grounded in this inquiry arc from C3. Well, in the process I talked to you about, I've done a lot of coaching with teachers, and they have asked often, how do I break that down into something that maybe is a little more manageable? I get this and I want to do C3, but I'm supposed to teach George Washington or Mesopotamia or the French Revolution or whatever that is. So as a part of that, this is sort of a 1, 2, 3, 4 step method that I have used with teachers. And how do we get started designing inquiry lessons? So if this is helpful to you, feel free to use it. I don't think it's anything profound. It just makes sense to me. It's how I think through a unit or I think through a lesson. It's the kind of lessons I write. But let me kind of walk you through it, and then we're going to talk about those parts and connect them to C3 using active classroom series. So the beginning part is always start with a question. So depending on what level you're working with, if you're working on a unit, that might be several weeks of instruction. That would be more of a compelling question, a big overarching question. If you're working on a lesson plan that's a 1-day lesson or a 2-day lesson, that might be a supporting question that's more narrow, and that might just be able to wrap that kind of answer to the question up within a day or 2. So those are words that come from the C3, if that is new to you, compelling and supporting questions. Those questions can be teacher generated. In other words, you have the question and you put it out there to the students as you begin your unit or your lesson, and then students sort of examine evidence to answer that question. Or they could be student generated. And I'm going to show you a strategy to help you get students to generate questions. And those student generated questions could guide your unit or your lesson. So that's the first part. So we say stage 1, we're going to say begin with the question. And so I would challenge you, if you don't do that already, to organize your teaching where you're focusing students on looking for evidence to answer a question. So then the second part is then you got to add text. And I'm going to use that word text with the literacy focus in disciplinary literacy and social studies is all about a variety of text. Those could be primary or secondary sources, and you will mention that in your chat feature. They could also be visuals. So it doesn't have to be a written text. It could be a map. It could be a piece of artwork, a political cartoon, a photograph, a chart or graph. We know those are social studies skills, analyzing charts and graphs. Any of those things are what I'm talking about when I say text. So we add text. So students have got to be able to collaborate to look at text. Maybe it's a map and a primary source. So we put those together and we're looking for evidence to answer our question. But part 3 right here, I put to the side because we know that students, whether they're middle school or high school or elementary, whatever level, they don't always bring with them the skills to be able to analyze those texts. Political cartoons are challenging for us, even as educators sometimes, or they don't always have the background knowledge or the reading skills or the language skills to be able to understand sometimes those primary sources or secondary sources. So I put step 2 and 3 together because along the way, you've got to use what you know are some of those best practice research-based literacy strategies to teach students how to do that. So it's analyzing sources skills. It could be think alouds or modeling your thinking or read with a partner, close reading strategies, all kinds of things will fit in that number 3 right there. So the number 2 and number 3 sort of go hand in hand. And then at the end of our unit or lesson, whichever level you're planning on, we want students to be able to communicate conclusions. And the key to that is we want them to be able to answer that question with evidence from text. And that's talking our literacy language, but it's also referring to that C3 inquiry arc too, because we want them to have an evidence-based argument. So if that 1, 2, 3, 4 thing works for you, feel free to use it. It's a logical way to think through how to plan. So let's look at that and talk about, okay, what do we mean by begin with a question? So I'm going to use actually from Kentucky's language here. Kentucky has new social studies standards this year, but it's similar across the country as everybody implements these C3 framework. And what do we mean by compelling questions? So we talked about a compelling question is one that's big and overarching that might guide your whole unit. That might be several weeks of instruction. And I really like some of the language here, that it's open-ended, that it's big significant issues, that it's intellectually challenging. It's more than a yes or no answer, that it pulls from multiple perspectives, that it, I like the last part there, that it can be investigated through the discipline strands. So you could look at the topic from a geography focus, an economics focus, history focus, all of that comes together in your big, broad question. So that would guide a unit. Supporting questions then are more narrow, and that's how you break down the compelling question to make that manageable for students. So we know when we have a big overarching question that we've got to break that down into manageable chunks for students, and that's what supporting questions are. So supporting questions could guide 1 day or 2 days of instruction. You're still using the text, it's just a smaller piece of content. So let's look at each of those parts. So I'm going to call it dimension 1. We're going to say begin with the question because that's the beginning of our inquiry arc. And remember I said it could be teacher generated or student generated. Let's look at some of the series in Active Classroom that have that built in already. So again, if you're not familiar to Active Classroom, feel free to email us at the end and we'll put you in contact with the person that can help you explore this resource. But I'm going to highlight several different series from it so you can see how the C3 dimensions are built in automatically. This particular series is called C3 Inquiry. And I did several screenshots, so we're not looking at Active Classroom Live, but these are screenshots of what you would see as you log into that. This particular one provides the question with you in any C3 inquiry lessons. You'll see the question right off the beginning page. So this one would be a middle school U.S. history probably. The Louisiana Purchase, was it a good bargain? If you notice, then on the left-hand side, you're going to have a variety of sources, and I tried to circle the series so you can make sure to see it. A variety of sources that students would analyze to help answer that question. So this would be an example of a teacher-generated question that you would give them the question as you started the unit. So then dimensions 2 and 3, you're investigating through the disciplinary tools. So we're going to look at that through the lens of some of those sources will be a history focus, some will be an economics focus, some will have a geography focus. We're also through that process looking at evidence. So if you see each of these, there are a variety of primary sources. You could assign them digitally, you could print those out and have different groups looking at different sources. But all the students are looking at the sources to be able to answer that question from the beginning of the lesson. So this is just a screenshot of one of the sources. And then dimension 4 is automatically built into these C3 series as well, and those are communicating results and taking action. So if you notice, and this is just a screenshot of that page from our Louisiana Purchase lesson, there are a variety of prompts that you could choose from to have students use those primary sources and write a letter, write a reflection, have a talk, have a discussion. It gives several different choices that you as a teacher could either assign or let students pick, so you have a little bit of differentiation there in that. So that's the last piece of that series. And also the taking action. And if you notice, it is down here at the bottom, so you get a variety of sources, and then students can complete any of those that you decide to use. The taking action part always takes that particular history content piece or geography content piece and applies it to something kind of more modern in the world. So for this particular one, could a true sovereign land purchase still take place today? And most of them have writing tasks and have rubrics that go with it. So notice how that whole C3 series was based on that inquiry arc framework. So that's just one series to look at, and there are a variety of lessons in that particular series on U.S. history and world history that are purposefully aligned to that C3 framework already. We said one of the ways you could begin with a question is to have a student-generated question guiding your lesson or unit. This is one of my favorite strategies. Again, if you want to email me, I'll be glad to share this with you. And it's called I Notice, I Wonder. One of the challenges sometimes with students is they don't have enough background knowledge to generate questions that would guide your unit because it could be brand new content to them. So the I Notice, I Wonder strategy works with the visual, it works with the painting, video clip, political cartoon. You have to give them something to develop questions about. So this particular one is a simple version of it, but I Notice, I Wonder. So as they look at their artwork, for instance, they would write down all the things they notice. So it's a very literal description of what they see and then what they wonder about. And then as you think about designing your inquiry unit, you let their I Wonder questions as a class guide what they explore next. So I Notice, I Wonder. There's also another version of this, and I saw this in an elementary classroom just last week, where you do I See, I Think, I Wonder. And if you notice, this was a graphic organizer teacher graciously shared with me that she's put the prompting questions in here. What do you see in this picture? And put just to remind them, we're only doing observations. Then what do you think it means? And where might you connect that to prior knowledge? And we're going to make inferences. They had been working on that skill. And then what questions do you have? And as a class, they looked at a painting and they filled out their See, Think, and Wonders. And then she wrote those on the board, and that guided what they explored next in the next few days. So a See, Think, and Wonder, or I Notice, I Wonder, works with lots of different visuals. Active Classroom has a variety of visuals, and I'll show you how to search just by that at the end. This is one of my favorite ones for teaching westward expansion and manifest destiny. And those of you that are 8th grade folks, I'm sure have used this before, but this is John Gast's American Progress. So this is a great painting to start out with I Notice, I Wonder, because you can have students just literally, what are all the things you see in this particular painting? So they will write down things like the Native Americans and the buffalo and the trains, and you have to explain that's telegraph a little bit, and in the farmers and who's the lady, and those are the kind of, and then they will generate questions. Why is everybody moving to the left? Why is it dark on one side? And even I've seen this even with 5th grade students, and it works really well. So you could start with this particular painting and use an I Notice, I Wonder, and this is actually from History Unfolding. And History Unfolding is a series in Active Classroom that is all visuals. So it's a great place to start in developing an inquiry unit. So let me show you what that looks like. In Active Classroom, again, this is a Manifest Destiny lesson. Again, you see sort of your table of contents here, and this is illustration 1. And I wanted to show you, if you haven't seen the image examiner features, you can click on that, and the top one is a magnifying glass that will let students zoom around. So again, you could assign this digitally, or you could use it at your teacher workstation. There's also a way, the second one there is to make it full screen. And then the third one actually does picture quadrants, and you can click on a particular quadrant and it'll zoom in so students can see that. Students of all ages think that's a really fun thing to do. So you could, if you sign it digitally or even as using it as a teacher station, you could zoom in on the quadrants and let them fill out that I notice, I wonder graphic organizer, and then that's going to affect what you do next for your day. So that's your beginning with the question, and the student generated questions would be from the I wonder column. So then what? So what do we do next? So we could have a reading. There are all kinds of things that you could do this. This one I just pulled from Power Basics, which is a series in Active Classroom. It's designed for English language learners or struggling readers. So we could say, all right, we have this list of I wonder questions. Let's see if we can find some answers. So again, you could print this out or you could assign it digitally and use the digital tools. Let me show you what some of those look like. So in the highlighting and annotating tool, let me minimize that for a second. Here, you can have students highlight main ideas. You can have them annotate to the side. And let me show you some screenshots of what that would look like. Sometimes when I have used this in teacher trainings, I have them highlight and annotate based on their I wonder questions. And you can customize those teacher comments and teacher notes. So I could tell students, I want you to highlight any interesting facts, and I want you to highlight in green anything that's an answer to the list of I wonder questions that you or your group came up with. So they're reading with a purpose. They are analyzing evidence, which is one of those pieces on the C3 inquiry arc, and tackling text together. But you're kind of giving them a purpose and they're reading for answers to their questions. So that is customized highlights and annotations. Again, you can print these out and use highlighters too and do the same thing. So here's what one might look like. This is me just doing this as a student. So I had them highlight answers to their I wonder questions and any interesting facts, and we could add in digitally our annotations. You as a teacher can comment on that in real time and give them feedback on their annotations. You'll see that from all your students. So we're looking for a text. We're analyzing a text to answer our questions that we generated ourselves. So kind of following through with that inquiry arc. Then we could use a primary source. So we had a secondary source that gave them an overview of Manifest Destiny. There is a series in Active Classroom called Primary Source Activities, and you can search it by topic. And so we could have a primary source of this particular one is a woman who went west with her family. So we could look for answers to our I wonder questions in a primary source as well. So we'd have both examples of a secondary and a primary. Again, dimensions 2 and 3, we're using our disciplinary tools and evaluating sources and using evidence. And then we want to wrap it all up. And it depends on what you do with this unit. This unit might be big for you, and as you do westward expansion and Manifest Destiny, you take it through Jackson and the Trail of Tears. If this is part of your compelling question is that, you might want to end it with this dimension 4, and this is out of a series called Applying Common Core. And if you notice, this series has a variety of text that we talked about. It has a variety of writing tasks. This particular one is the argumentative writing task, which is right out of our reading writing standards. Should Andrew Jackson be on the $20 bill? So it'd be a great way to tie it all together at the end and let students take a position, but they would have to use evidence from any of the text that you use. So that could be the painting or the secondary source reading or the primary source as evidence to answer that particular question. So again, that is Applying Common Core. Also wanted to kind of show you this might be another way to do dimension 4, communicating conclusions. In the series, the Backwards Planning PowerPoint series, each of these have different projects that go with them. I kind of show you the side here. This particular one I really like, Project 2, has them look at 2 different paintings of the West from multiple perspectives. And they do a compare and contrast, so that would be a great way to tie that unit together as well. There's also one that they might pick a frontier newspaper or a mapping westward expansion. And if you notice, the PowerPoints that come in this series also start with essential questions. So they provide some of those questions that you could use as teacher generated. So your dimension 4 is really your assessment, or part of it is, so you could tile that together with a variety of options that are in active classroom already. So if we go back and look at this to kind of just get us back in the C3 framework, we have talked through a lesson on westward expansion that had a question and had student generated questions. We looked at our readings from the disciplinary tools, mostly history and geography on that one, but some economics too would be embedded in that. We looked at sources just quickly. We pulled a secondary source and a primary source and a painting. And if we use the Andrew Jackson, or if we use the paintings, we would have students developing claims using evidence and then communicating their conclusions. So that could be a simple way to tile that together, and you've done all the parts of that particular inquiry arc just with that westward expansion. I just chose that as an example. Whatever you teach, we've got a 7th grade person, I think. The same type of thing could be done with any world history topic or geography topic, to tile that together in a way that targets the inquiry arc. So let's look at another series, and I just kind of want to walk you through again, how do we design an inquiry unit? Use this as a high school, probably world history topic, and this is a series called The Historian's Apprentice, which is probably a high school series. For those of you that are middle school folks, you could pull some of the primary sources out or secondary source excerpts, I think, and use with some middle school kids. But this series is all designed around a question. So the question is embedded: was the Reformation a revolution? That's a great, compelling question to try to answer in several days of instruction, several days of sources. Then we're going to investigate through the disciplines. And notice in this particular series, The Historian's Apprentice, it comes with vocabulary, a warm-up activity, a background essay. These are one of my favorites too. They're 5 habits of historical thinking that are in the PowerPoint to help students think like historians. And this series also comes with an interpreting primary sources and an interpreting secondary sources checklist. So even for you middle school folks, if you don't use this particular content, those checklists are wonderful to remind students of the skills they need to think about as they look at a secondary source or a primary source. So for this Reformation lesson, we're going to try to look at all these documents. You could choose all of them, you could just pick parts of them, but we're going to try to use those documents as evidence to answer our question: was the Reformation a revolution? So notice again, I just did the screenshots of these, many different documents you can pick and that are primary sources, also secondary sources with that analyzing secondary sources checklist there. And it ends with document-based questions. So it has a couple of document-based questions that you could pick and choose from that students would write a response to using evidence from any of those documents that they looked at already and that they analyzed together. So it neatly wraps together all those C3 dimensions. This is an example of one that you might want to use for geography. And this is an active classroom series called Issues Today. And this particular lesson is about Africa and refugees. So if you teach geography or current events, either one, any version of that, these come with questions. So our question would be: how should the international community handle refugees? It's going to give some background. There are always maps with data. So we talked about maps and graphs and charts for social studies text. So those are embedded in the lesson. So they use that dimension 2, investigating using evidence. That's dimensions 2 and 3. And in the Issues Today lessons, it shows 2 different sides of the argument with some background information, which is a great place to start with students. And you could do all kinds of things with that. Communicating conclusions could be a debate, could be a paper, an argumentative type of writing, classroom discussion, all kinds of things could work with that. But notice that they're getting two different points of view. They could pick a point of view, they could research that even more. All of those pieces are embedded in those Issues Today lessons. Well, so if we look back just to kind of review, all kinds of things are built into Active Classroom to help you target the C3 framework. But again, you can design lessons with these using the primary sources, secondary sources that maybe you already use to kind of target the inquiry framework. And I would challenge you to think as you begin your planning, how can you use these 1, 2, 3, 4 steps So start with the question, start small. If inquiry is new to you, start small with the question for one lesson. Add some example of a text or text. If you want to start small, add a map and a primary source reading, or add a political cartoon and a secondary source reading. Add a literacy strategy where students highlight main ideas and they share their ideas with a partner, or you think aloud as you analyze a primary source together. And then how are you going to get them to communicate conclusions? And communicate conclusions could be something as simple as an exit slip that they answer the question with evidence from their text as they leave, or it could be a longer document-based essay or presentation, whatever you choose to use as the product for that particular lesson or unit. So how do I find all these things in Active Classroom? Those of you that are Active Classroom users, you click on Activities. I'm just going to screenshot through this. You can search by keyword and type a topic, or it's even easier to use the advanced toolbar and you can search by subject. So you could search for geography, US history, world history. You could search by era or theme. You can search by series title. Say, I just want to go look and see what all the C3 inquiry lessons are in Active Classroom, or I really want to look at the issues today, or I want to look at the Atlas of World History. All those are listed there, and you choose which one you want to look at, and it will give you a page of all the choices that are lessons in that series. You could also search by activity type. Let me show you what those look like. If I'm searching by series, this is what it looks like, and you could pick any of those kind of things in that drop-down menu. If you are searching by activity type, this is one of my favorites in designing C3 lessons, because once you get a question developed or students generate their questions, you need a variety of sources or text. So it could be you want a historical map. It could be you want an image. We talked about that painting with that westward expansion. Or it could be you want a video, you want a PowerPoint slide, a reading. You can filter your search by the types of text or types of sources you want to target those domains 2 and 3 in the inquiry arc. And at any time, I always try to end with this. There's a contact us button and a question mark if you need help as you're exploring an Active Classroom. And it comes up with tutorials and all sorts of information for you to search, for you to assign if you want to use it digitally. Lots of information there for you on the help screen. So I have talked through quickly how to do that. If you have comments or questions or ways that you design inquiry lessons or units, feel free to add those in the chat feature.
While we're waiting for people to comment, Jen, thank you so much. That was really great presentation. I really loved all the strategies and the activities that you picked out to meet that C3 framework. I'm very new to C3 framework, and so I really was just familiar with C3 inquiry, but I loved how you brought in Power Basics and the backwards planning PowerPoint to fit that framework. So I really enjoyed this presentation. Thank you so much.
Here's my email. If you want this PowerPoint, anyone, feel free to email me and I'll be glad to share it with you. And I know the video is going to be on Social Studies School Service website, but I'll be glad to share if you want to email me.
Also, as you exit this webinar, I just want to remind you that there is a survey. If you would, please fill that out as you are exiting this webinar, and thank you.